One of the advantages of being on a small station, this is KSFP 102.5 FM, public radio in San Francisco, is I feel a great deal more freedom to take risks. And so I'm going to try an experiment on you. We'll see if it works. As you know, I'm a career counselor, as you may know. And so what I've done is I'll give you a little background. On whether it be TV or radio or print or internet, the normal thing that people do is they prepare by having a very carefully designed script or an answer to whatever the problem is, and so everything ends up seeming very pat. I thought it might be interesting for you to see how a real life career counselor who's got a lot of experience, I've had almost 6,000 clients, how I react to situations in the moment on the fly. I'm going to try to think out loud. It won't be as polished, but hopefully it may actually be more valid, more honest, and maybe even just more interesting radio. So what I did was I simply made a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 common problems that my career counseling clients face. And I'm just going to react as though they were callers to this radio show. And I had to, within a quite limited amount of time, provide something of value. We'll see if I do or not. You can always, there's a million podcasts out there, a million radio shows, a million YouTube videos. You can always just say, I hate this. But anyway, here we go. Okay, the first one is a PhD in biomedical, genetics or biomedical stuff, who couldn't get a job. She had completed her third year of a postdoc, which is after you get your PhD and you can't get a real job, you get a postdoc, pays you 30, 40, 50,000 bucks a year, and you're working underneath somebody. But it has to end after 2 or 3 years. Anyway, and she couldn't get an academic job. And by the way, this anecdote is not made up. None of them are. They all come from real life clients. But this one is a composite of lots of people. I was honored to be asked to speak to the Society for Neuroscience. There were a ton of people who attended my session and afterwards came up to me, and this is the most common situation. PhD in genetics or molecular biology, interested in neuroscience, that is the diseases of the brain or enhancement of intelligence or whatever, and they couldn't get a job. And then so they had to take a 3 years of a postdoc, which is, as I said, low pay, and then could not get an academic job, and they're desperate after all these years they spent trying to prepare to get this degree. What should they do? So here are my thoughts. First of all, let's troubleshoot what you did. You said you couldn't get a job. Now, how carefully did you put yourself in the shoes of the employer and write a resume that's going to make them say, I really want to hire you? Or what's really unfortunately important in an academic job, since it sounds like that's what you want, is whether you're going to bring in money or you have brought in money. Have you done a good enough job of coming up with a research agenda that's fundable? Unfortunately, and I don't like this, but the funding is for certain kind of disabilities, especially in we're talking about brain stuff. So from autism to Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, depression, major mental illnesses, rather than very fundamental research, which I deeply believe is more worthy. Studying the biological basis, less practical, less trying to develop a drug, but rather the basic science. Have you done enough to create a research agenda that is fundable, or even to try to get alongside a tenured professor to see if you could get him or her to write a grant? But let's assume you've done all that and it's not worked. By the way, is your interviewing skills good enough? Now, indeed, in most universities, research is what counts much more than teaching. Have you been able to articulate with a certain measure of enthusiasm what you do as a researcher, but also demonstrate that you're a good teacher? If not, should you get a one-on-one coach to help you with your teaching? Because there are many people who are deliberately go to a field like molecular biology as a researcher because they're not the best communicators. But if you want to work in a university, which you implied you said you wanted, you've got to be at least an acceptable teacher. So, and the best way to learn is to have somebody watch you. Give mock lectures, lead mock discussions in front of somebody who is a known really good teacher and beg for honest feedback. Let's assume you've done all that. Have you also just, unfortunately, and I despise this, that just applying through the front door is unlikely to get you the job. People know people and you get referrals. Have you done a good enough job to have your favorite professor or two, who maybe is the one who is also well connected, to make calls on your behalf? Not even emails, but calls on your behalf, or to forward your resume to somebody, even if the right departments. Let's say there are 5 or 6 different universities where your research interests are consistent with that university. Has your advisor, the person who's leading your postdoc, have they made inquiries on your behalf? If not, is it because you're just not that good? Do you need to work on improving? Or do you need to face that you're not good enough to get an academic job? The next step down for most people would be a job that is in industry, biotech, pharmaceuticals, etc. Do you need to make peace with the fact that you're not going to get an academic job? And then you need, of course, if you're focusing on an industry, most of the research there is not so long-term. It's not basic. It's not about the biological, chemical, physical, or mathematical basis of brain function, but it is more about creating a job, creating a drug, or a treatment, or something that is more practical in the short term. To try to bring money into the pharmaceutical company, because it takes 10 years to develop a drug. They can't afford to take another 10 or 20 years of doing basic research that's not having anything to do with a specific drug, in hopes that it will eventually lead to practical value and money. Otherwise, they'll go out of business. So do you want to make peace with the fact that you probably need to focus, if you've done all the other stuff to try to get an academic job, do you need to try to focus on how to get a job in industry, and write your applications and get your referrers to say things about you that's imply that you're open to and have curious interest in areas of practicality. And then third, and I think I'll stop there. So that's the advice I would give to a biomedical PhD who couldn't get a job, had completed a postdoc, had put in 6 or 7 years to get the doctorate, and then 3 more years to get the postdoc. Wants an academic job, couldn't get it. Those are my best thoughts as to how she might troubleshoot and see if she could indeed get an academic job if she did things right, or does she need to move down toward industry. The second scenario I'd like to give is of a 40-year-old carpenter, and alas, this is very, very common. I don't have many blue-collar clients, but I've had a few, and some friends, and just people who've worked for me, around the house here, who they say, they could be carpenters or electricians or plumbers, and they say by the time they reach their 40s, their body's giving out. And in this scenario, we're talking about a 40-year-old carpenter who's got a bad back. And I deliberately pick carpenter rather than electrician because it's a lot easier for an electrician to get a job, much tougher for a carpenter, where you're not capitalizing on the increase in technology that ever more things are technological. This is a guy who's got an old school set of skills, and frankly, there are a lot of people who are coming into this country who have those kind of carpentry skills. So he is competing with quite a large pool, and where pay tends to be going down. I do remember a client 25 years ago who was making $30 an hour as a carpenter, which was enough to support his family. And then he came back to me a number of years later and pointed out that he said salaries have gone way down because there are a lot of immigrants to this country who are willing to work for $15 under the table. No benefits, no nothing. And so he was terrified. So there is a declining income for people like carpenters. And the timeless problem of people who are carpenters who have been doing it for 10 or 20 years, they're going to have bad back, they're going to have bad knees, etc. And so what would be my advice for him? The most obvious thing is you train some young person. You've got 10 or 20 years in this. Try to, if you've been working for somebody else, do a little learning about how to be a self-employed carpenter, maybe in a specialized niche. We are in an era, in the COVID era certainly, where people are spending more time home. So homeowners are building raised beds, they're fixing their gardens, they're doing things like that, building gates and fences and decks and whatever. So if the job market may not be bad, but you don't want to be doing it. So is this a time to get a kid who is either still in high school, out of high school, not a college kind of kid, because this is a different kind of skill set, and that kid would be so grateful to be an apprentice to somebody who has been an experienced carpenter and teaching him the ropes. To have him start by handing you, screws and nails and fasteners and whatever, but little by little as he learns, and it could be a she, of course, give him more and more responsibility, and therefore he's going to do more of the work. You're going to be the owner of the business, learning a little bit about how to run a simple, small, one-person business. It doesn't be a complicated, fancy business. A very simple business where you're going to get one, maybe two people that you're going to work underneath you. The second idea is that many people, when they start to reach their 40s, and who have been blue-collar people, and people who tend to be blue-collar people are not necessarily academics. So I'm not going to send you running back to college and get a degree, because first of all, it tends to take a lot longer, if at all, because people, whether we like to admit it or not, people as they get older, even in their 40s, which is not old, have a harder time learning all that material. And so, especially if you're somebody who has not been a school person, and in this composite letter to me, I don't know how academic you are, but I'll assume that the average, that you'd be wiser to try to make your career transition outside of the world of carpentry without going back to school. And the most likely way to do that is, and I'm probably going to end up saying this about all of the career changers, is through the people you've got to know. The fact that you're a little older means you've had more time to accumulate friends, hopefully, colleagues, people who respect you, in addition to relatives and who are customers maybe who are happy with your work. It does normally require you to use networking to get your first new job in a new field, because especially with the high unemployment rate we're facing, why should some stranger hire you with no experience when he or she could get somebody with experience? So normally the only person who's going to do that is somebody who knows you, likes you, respects you. So you really need to be systematic about it. Make a list of 10, 20, 30, the more the merrier, people who like you. They don't have to be in a position to hire you, but they have to be in a position to refer you. For example, I'm no dentist, but I know an excellent dentist, Tom Smithers, my longtime dentist. And so if somebody asked me for a dentist, I could certainly proudly recommend Tom Smithers. So just make a list of everybody who likes you, and then pitch them individually, whether it be by phone or email or text, or get together for a hike, or you'd have a drink together, or whatever the hell it is. Invite a party, have people come over, whatever it is, to tell them you're ready to change careers. You've been a carpenter into your 40s, but now your back is giving you some problems, or your knees, or whatever, and it's time to move on, and you're open to anything that will utilize, and just say whatever it is your best abilities are. Is it working with your hands? Is it visualizing things? Is it calming customers? Is it whatever it is? Say one or two things that are your core best skills. Tell them that you're particularly interested in using those, but you're wide open to other things too as you explore what might be out there. That's the best advice I can give. And then to make that transition, don't worry about money in the first job. Your first job is going to be basically you're going to get paid to learn. So whatever it is, if it has some potential to be a field in which you could be good in and it might be viable, take the job. If it doesn't work, you can certainly quit, no problem at all. So that's my best advice to our 40-year-old carpenter with a bad back. This is as good a time as any to let you know you're listening to How to Do Life. I'm Marty Nemko, here on KSFP 102.5 Public Radio in San Francisco. Or, of course, if you're watching me on YouTube, I try to kill two birds with one stone by recording the show while making a YouTube video. When I come back, I'm going to talk about other common problems: an older sex worker who's not getting enough customers, a computer programmer who's gradually losing his sight, a shoe salesman with a foot fetish. I don't know if we're going to have any time to get to the rest of them, but the ones I've got on my list is a bartender who's an alcoholic, and a smart woman who is hated at work. In any event, stay with me. Thank you for staying with me. I'm Marty Nemko, career counselor who's trying an experiment here. I made a list of very common, difficult problems that my career counseling clients come in with, and rather than preparing a nice pat answer, and you may not trust me, but it's the truth, I've done absolutely nothing to prepare for this. I'm using my almost 6,000 clients worth of experience to present to you what's coming off the top of my head as to what I would likely say to this person who has got this career problem, so that you can experience more authentically what a career counselor or what somebody might be like, rather than some nice pat little scripted thing. So you hopefully get a window into the way I think, and maybe it's even more entertaining. Okay, so this next example is an older sex worker who's not getting enough customers. So yes, alas, young people tend to be more attractive in that line of work, and so the question is, I would be asking him or her, and again, of course, sex workers can be of both genders. What would you say makes you good at it? Is it you're sensitive to the person's feelings? Is it you're really good at physicality? If it's sensitive to feelings, maybe the person should be in a counseling profession of some sort and get some training. If it's really, really good physically, maybe you want to be a massage therapist or a physical therapist. Anything where touch would matter. Doing facials, any of that kind of thing. If what makes him or her good as a sex worker is that they're very entrepreneurial and they're able to figure out ways to get clients and they're very assertive, maybe they want to get into sales or something like that. So as always, the goal is when you're making a career transition to try to identify what are your best core strengths in that career that might be translatable to another. Okay, let's turn to another problem. A computer programmer who's gradually losing his sight. This is a tough one, and it's not really an area of my expertise, but here's what comes to mind. So the programmer, by definition, is somebody who is quite analytical and precise, and because they can't see, I'm wondering whether it would be possible. There are so many assisted devices. If the person didn't say they don't like programming, but very often, well, it's hard to say. Let's assume they still like programming, but they can't see. Could they use auditory tools or techniques in order to continue to program? So, for example, if they have a boss who's giving them an assignment, asking and it may not be possible. I will admit, I'm no programmer. I know nothing about the field, so it may be BS. But I would probably ask my boss, can you verbally describe for me, give me enough information verbally so that I can do the programming? Or maybe even this can be translated to Braille, so you've got something, and then to see if those assisted tools might work. But let's assume you can't. Let's say the person has to leave programming. It's not the optimal field. So, but if you're highly analytical, there are many careers that obviously use analytical skills. Most literally, analysts. The federal government, for example, which I believe is the last bastion of fully benefited permanent employment, and they tend to be very open to disabled. A federal job where you're as an analyst, where again there might be reasonable accommodations, so they'll give you, instead of having to review things auditorily, visually, you may be able to do it auditorily. There also are now, I think there are technological tools that translate, that you can take a file and I know it's true. It translates text into speech. That could be gold for you. So, I'm an old guy, so, I have, and while I try to stay up on technology, I don't, but I would guess that there are a hell of a lot of technological tools, speech to hearing and other kind of tech tools, text to voice, that can enable you, whether you want to stay in programming or you want to just use your analytical skills, being blind or sight impaired may not be as challenging as when I was a young man. So those are my thoughts there. Next thought. This is the next case of a scenario of somebody who would be coming to me for career advice. This is a shoe salesman with a foot fetish. My honest reaction there is, if you feel that fetish about feet merely drives you to do a good job and makes you connect better with the client without it crossing the line into unacceptable behavior, then maybe what you need is absolution and not feel guilty about it. We're all motivated by different things. I'm talking about a very innocent example. Some people who love dogs, they may have a fetish for dogs, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't work. It mean that they should work with animals. And of course, I'm not talking about bestiality, sex, or any of that, but I'm talking about we are motivated by different things. So I wouldn't immediately jump to, oh my God, you have a foot fetish, you need to leave being a shoe salesman. So the question is, you must look inward and be honest with yourself, or maybe even ask your peers. Let's say your boss. Does your boss or notice anything wrong? And I question you that is more objective. Have you had complaints from your customers that you're fitting the customer with the shoes has gone beyond fitting them to unacceptable touching? So that would be my first take. Now, of course, if you've got enough of a clue that you're at risk or have already taken that foot fetish beyond what is acceptable behavior, then maybe you want to use your sales skills in something that is going to be less tempting. And some areas where you're likely to continue to grow, I believe the Democrats are going to win big in the fall, and that's going to create increased jobs in the whole Green New Deal area, everything related to the environment, also anything related to immigrants. Unfortunately, apart for whoever wins, I do think that cybersecurity and public health are going to be hugely growing fields. There is apparently bipartisan support for infrastructure development, although with a huge amount of trillions of dollars of COVID spending, just to put money back in taxpayers' hands, ostensibly. It's not clear that there's going to be enough money for infrastructure, but I digress. But those are my thoughts to the shoe salesman. The next example is a bartender who's an alcoholic. Now there, I can't, you notice in some of the other examples, I encourage the person to before running and leaving the profession, to stay with it. But if somebody is an alcoholic, self-described, and is a bartender, that's just too much temptation. And it's easy for me to say than to do, but if I'm talking to you, dear bartender who's an alcoholic, I say, do you think you can muster the courage to get out? Because it's only going to, the chances are, nothing is a guarantee, but the chances are if you stay in, you're going to be more problemed. And really, after a while, if you've been doing it for a while, a life of being a bartender where you're working nights and weekends, late nights and weekends, is that really facilitative of an overall life? That's a fine thing to do when you're 22 and partying or whatever. But is it a life? I don't think so. So ask yourself, what careers had you thought about when you were a little boy or a little girl, that you aspired to? What appeals to you now? If you can't think of anything, what is your core essence? Are you more of a people person? Are you one of those bartenders who's like a Cheers, always has the right comment to everybody? Are you the psychologist type who listens very well and asks questions? Are you more of a master at remembering recipes? Are you more of a salesman who can sell more drinks, without getting the person 86th, if that's the right word? I think that is getting him kicked out for being too drunk. Are you able to keep people calm when they're about to fight, or when somebody's asked for another drink and you say, "I think you've had enough"? Are you good at keeping people calm? If you're a bartender, chances are you're a fun-loving person. Do you need to be in the fun industry of some sort? The cruise industry is probably dead, but if it comes back, there'll be probably a relative, shortage of people who want to work on cruise ships. I'm sure they're going to be, by the time they open up, I'm hoping that they'll make them quite safe, and that's not going to be an issue. Should you be working in the cruise industry or other kind of entertainment industry, where people are having a good time, restaurants. Of course, restaurants put you on alcohol too, so maybe that's not such a good idea. What other kind of fun, that people have? So the sports world. Should you be working somehow? There are a lot of people who want to work in sports, but the only really solid way to get into the sports industry is if you're a really good salesperson, selling advertising, selling cruise seasons tickets, selling something. Because everybody wants to work in sports. Everybody wants to be the scout. Everybody wants to deal with the players. But my point is that there are, if you are a bartender, utilize what is your core best skills to try to transition to something else. And the last question, and it appears like I'm going to have time to get through all 8, is this is a smart woman who is hated at work. The fact that she denoted that she's a woman tends to be, not always, mean that she feels that some of the reason is she's a woman and she's being not treated as well. Her ideas are not or treated as well, or there's jealousy or whatever because she's a woman. So let's talk about that a little bit. Sometimes that's true, but it's very easy for us to externalize responsibility and say it's our race, our gender, our sexual orientation. And it sometimes is, but it's very wise normally to take a look inward, because not all women, minorities, and gay people are subject to have career failure because, or are hated because of that. So it's usually smarter to look inward and say, really, how good are your ideas? Are you emotionally intelligent enough? Are you annoying too many people? Are you being insensitive to people's needs? Are you not giving other people credit where they do? Are you throwing, if you're very attractive, are you throwing your looks in people's faces? Are you making little snide comments? So first, start to look inward, and then decide if you want to remediate what is a weakness. If you believe that in your workplace it really is gender, there's two choices to have. One is to say, is to go to HR or first go to the person you think, if it's, you sound like you said you were hated at work. That sounds like it's just one person, it's broadly. But let's say it's just one person mainly. Then the wise thing to do would be to see if, you start nice. Go to the person and say, I'm wondering, you seem to have something against me. I made some comments that I thought were quite worthy, and yet you shot them down. Am I doing anything to offend you? That's a good way to start. You're starting nice. And then if you get a sense that he or she is not reacting honestly or well or fair enough, you can always escalate and say, I notice that you're treating many women, with less validity. Is it because we're dumber, or is it because you have a thing against women, or whatever it is? Sometimes women also are very likely, that's too strong. There are some women who will sabotage other women because they're jealous of their looks, their age, their something. They're trying to show that they're superior. Some women like women who just stay equal on the same level. You need to ask yourself what you think is really operative there. So first look inward. And then if that's not going to work, look outward. And sometimes what you need is, may not even need to leave your workplace. You may need to, as I said, go to HR, or you may need to get a change of boss or a change of work group. Or if you really think it's a gender problem, and this is, what many women feel today, it's that some workplaces are just not female friendly enough. See if you can find and there are increasing numbers of companies and nonprofits and government agencies that are female dominated, and certain industries. My wife is the superintendent of schools in Napa County, and almost all the superintendents are women, almost all the principals are women, certainly all the teachers are, 93% of all elementary school teachers are women. So you can certainly find areas in which women are dominant, in the traditional ones, whether it be nursing or librarianship, but also many other industries today have very high proportions of women. I do know that I teach in the medical school at UCSF, and over 50% of the students, or 50% of the students in medical school today are women. So, and I know that's true of lawyers and in MBA schools. So you should be able to find a more female-centric place if you think that is going to be better suited to you. Also, certain industries like fashion and cosmetics tend to be female-centric. Anyway, that is all the time we have. I hope the experiment worked for you. I am career counselor Marty Nemko, reminding you that we find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.